But what land is available, we do mark open space on our comprehensive growth map. We don't do a whole lot to preserve it, though. It's marked. It's shown. But other than some of the FEMA guidelines and stormwater guidelines that give us some regulatory muscle, there's nothing. We don't prevent development in the designated open space areas in accordance with the regional open space plan. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. Another thing we'll talk about today is our transit plan for the region, and then Bike Ped infrastructure. So those are the three main topics. Each of those kind of they all play into the comprehensive growth map. We've created transit-oriented development is cooked into our comprehensive growth map, in that we have the three regional centers are designed to encourage basically unlimited density and mixed-use development. That combination supports transit. And then the neighborhood centers are designed to provide bus stops in the future, or just small inline bus stops as we establish bus routes. And again, a lot of this is looking way down the future. We're not really close to viable transit right now. We're moving in that direction, and Tim Simon will talk about his feelings on, or his thoughts on where we are in our evolution as a transit area. But how does Bike Ped fit into all that? So everything that we've talked about, every topic that we've talked about is cooked into the comprehensive growth map. And so as we start thinking about tweaking things, understanding that, well, if we tweak this, what impact does that have on some of the strategic principles that went into developing this thing? And then getting back to what I said on day one, I just wanted to reiterate today, why does all this matter? We're trying to understand some of the really moral principles, but just the principles that have to do with good stewardship of tax money and ensuring that the city remains viable, that we're not living beyond our means, that we're doing things to create a resilient, economically resilient infrastructure and environment that we can afford to own forever, versus we're doing things for a big immediate flash, but then we're stuck with a very long life cycle cost of some of the infrastructure. And that's fine if the infrastructure is returning on that investment. But if we're building stuff that doesn't return, and this is one of Chuck Marone's main points, then it doesn't work, and eventually you go bankrupt as a city. One thing that, and I'm talking more than I should, but one thing that came up yesterday, Betsy Riethmeyer I think it was a couple of days ago, had finished the book and was asking for recommendations of books that provide a counter argument to what Chuck Marone is saying. I would say anything written on city planning prior to about 15 or 20 years ago is the counter argument to where this is. What Chuck Marone says, the biggest counter argument against the strong towns philosophy, is that the strong towns philosophy can create a fairly stagnant class system if it's implemented poorly. And what he means by that is that it can create a steady growth environment where it limits how quickly people can jump in on the gravy train, I guess. That's kind of the argument. And then he devotes chapter 2 of the book to refuting that. So I actually think that it's an easy to refute argument, because if you're doing what a lot of cities do, and you're pouring a lot of tax money into attracting like this big thing, then it hardly ever pays out. And the people who play in that big thing is a very limited set. But if you're doing small incremental development, like what you see in the downtown Rogers or midtown Rogers, or even in uptown, as we start to see the edges of it to develop, there are more opportunities for smaller firms and smaller players that can come into play, especially in downtown Rogers, a little less in uptown Rogers. So I'll open that up to discussion, and we can do this by email or text, or if you have comments on that, I'll try to get it out to the group. But I am interested in criticizing what Chuck Marone is saying. I mean, what are the weaknesses in his basic argument? So, open for
I
that.
wasn't criticizing, I just want to know what the counter.
I mean academic criticism. I don't mean I'm being critical of you. I mean, what are the criticisms of his thesis? I mean, we're doing peer review. Yeah. What does a critical analysis of Chuck Marone look like, and where does he have weak arguments? I don't mean that like in a mean way. So with that, Paxton, are you ready? You want to share your screen?
Oh, wait.
Yeah, let me get unmuted. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
All right. I missed the first pass of your speech. I had a problem with my audio, so but I'll just pick it up where I heard you leave off. So let me share my screen. All right. Do you want me to turn on video? I don't know if you all have a video camera or not. If I need to turn it on, I'm happy to do so if you'd like me to.
No, we're good. Thank you.
It's good.
It's good? Okay. All right. Well, I apologize, everyone, for not being able to be there in person today. So just bear with me as I narrate over the slides that hopefully you all can see on the screen. Is it showing up okay?
Yes. Hey, Paxton, I'm not going to be able to talk to you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know that. All right.
We can see your slides. Everything's good.
I can talk to you, Patrick. That's good.
Okay, well, interrupt me if I start to go over on time. So I'll try to watch it myself. So, all right. Well, thank you all for having me today. I'm Paxton Roberts. I'm the executive director of Bike NWA. And I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak, especially as you all are dealing with this subject that I am both personally and professionally passionate about. Let's see if I can figure out how to click to the next slide. So who are we? We're a nonprofit that's trying to improve the quality of life in the region for over 30 years. We believe that building safe places for recreation and active transportation benefits the community in numerous ways. This includes health, economic, safety, tourism. I could go on and on. But I believe that we've reached the point that almost none of you would argue that the Razorback Greenway and other trails like this one at Lake Atalanta have not greatly benefited the region. Thankfully, cities like Rogers believed in a vision that if you invest and build a world-class piece of infrastructure, that users will come and the residents will benefit. And I believe we've seen that. Trail counters show over 250,000 people walking, biking, and skating on our trails in the region each year. And so this infrastructure, though, benefits more than bikes. Even though I'm often the bike guy and coming in to talk to you, it's just as important to realize that these trails are used by people walking, skating, getting to work for many other purposes beyond recreation. And that has many benefits when it comes to health and economic vitality. So over half the users are people in these other modes. But what is next? So I'm sure you are all familiar with growth, and we've seen the headlines about how fast our region is growing. The question becomes, how do we handle that growth? And so I really encourage everyone here today to think about that as we talk about the various approaches and solutions that John was speaking of earlier. I believe that we could all agree that we want the city to grow in a way that keeps the things intact that we love about this city. I am a lifelong resident of Northwest Arkansas. I always used to want to move away, but I've stayed long enough to appreciate it. But I believe that we all want to grow in a way that is more prosperous, more inclusive, and residents have a higher quality of life and a sense of belonging. I don't know that any of us would argue with those principles. But it's common to hear stories about how growing cities transform into something that almost no one likes. Heavy traffic congestion is just but one of the worries that we hear day to day. And I think we can all look to our neighboring states and neighboring cities that have seen extreme growth over the past decades, earlier than we have, and what those cities look like. They are deserts of asphalt, of commercial residences, high traffic congestion. I could go on and on. So how does Rogers do something different to not end up like some of those places, but have an even better return on the investment? I think a lot of times we assume that just because that's the way it's happened, that that is the best way to do so, and that we are realizing the best benefit we could on those models. But I think if you dive into the data, which John was referring to earlier, you'll see that when you unpack the cost of maintaining and keeping those areas and the return on the investment, the tax income, that there are better ways to do so. So how do we handle this growth? Planning and preparing is why you are all here today, to realize the return on investment in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, which is what I specifically work on. We need to tackle some challenges in a counterintuitive way. You know, it's bike and pedestrian infrastructure, for it to be successful and to see that return, relies on other things happening in the city. The higher the density, the more people will be using this infrastructure. The more mixed that residential and commercial are together, the more likely somebody is to walk and bike to that restaurant, that coffee shop, or to the doctor's office. The roads that we build, I think if you look around the country, wider, bigger, and more roads has not solved traffic congestion problems. We see that across the cities, like in Dallas. We see that in commute times. So I'm often perplexed at why do we keep repeating something that other people have done and haven't solved. I have a hard time finding cities that have built their way out of traffic congestion by just more and wider roads. The data shows that this just induces demands. Now, I myself am not saying I'm against roads. I spend more time in my car today than I do on my bike. I would love that to change, but I live in Fayetteville and my office is in Bentonville. And so I'm no way saying that we shouldn't build and maintain and continue to improve road, but I'm challenging people to think about them in a different way, and that adding a wider lane or even adding more lanes does not always solve the problem. But if you take people off of that road and they use a bicycle or they walk for trips, then you can actually see a difference. And then safe neighborhood streets. Something I find people that I've never heard anybody say, I want people to drive faster on my neighborhood streets. Whether you bike, walk, have your kids play in the front yard, or play with your dog, slowing down neighborhood streets is critical to creating safe neighborhoods and a higher quality of life. But all of these things have a return on investment. So in economic benefits, trail infrastructure has had over $150 million economic benefit to the region. That was based on the 2019 study, maybe it was 18 by this point, that studied the health and economic impacts of trails just in our region. That is not data from somewhere else. That is data here today. So there's an opportunity to increase that return on investment. Health benefits. A new study from the University of Arkansas right here shows that children living within a half mile of a trail have a significant positive effect on lowering their obesity rates. This is even more significant for children who are low income and minority. So there is a real benefit of what we've already done that we have an opportunity to make even greater. And then in terms of equity, it's not hard to Google and look at reducing transportation costs is a huge factor in making housing affordable. It provides a more stable workforce and it lowers the dollars that a resident has to pay out of their pocket. So by focusing on smarter transportation, smarter growth, making it to where people can live closer to where they work, you can help tackle the affordable housing problem without even getting into all the policies and factors that make it such a complex area. So I thought today I would just use this as a backdrop to talk a little more about these features, especially when it comes to the Bike Ped network, because I think you all know what trails are. We have plenty of them on the ground in Rogers. But what is key to building more trails and seeing them used even more is looking at our growth in a way. And so often people, like here at New Hope Road in South Dixieland, I find that I often hear of them fighting mixing uses and at major nodes on the edge of neighborhoods. And really, if you want to dive into the history, this is an artifact of the industrial era when commercial was dirty and smelly. Our neighborhood patterns developed because people did not want to live close to a factory spewing smoke and smog. And so as we look today, it's a completely different picture when it comes to neighborhood services. And so I think what we can see is that if we continue to look at these as opportunities to infill and to create more commercial uses closer to where people live, they're more likely to go to that coffee shop, that doctor's office, that gas station, as we can see here on the map, than they are driving across town to get to that same feature. And so by infilling and developing these areas, you will help your traffic problem just through the use of land use and zoning and planning. And then when you build the bicycle infrastructure that gets people from these neighborhoods and pedestrians, sidewalks, crossings, you then make it easier and more convenient to get to these locations. And if one thing we've seen around the country and the rest of the world, that the more easy and safe and convenient that you can make it for somebody to leave their house and choose to bike or walk, the more the higher rates you're going to see comes. But this also has benefits on tax revenue because this increases with density. There's plenty of data out there that shows that density has a higher return when it comes to taxes. And so when development occurs on the edges of cities and in lower densities areas, the data also shows that oftentimes these cost the city more to maintain than they do to bring in tax revenue. Job consistency, journey to work. So neighborhood services like coffee shops, grocery stores, and dry cleaners. If you infill with housing around these areas, it's more likely that the people that work at those services will live in close proximity to them, which means they don't have to drive to work or even drive as far. And that would greatly reduce the travel times and the congestion around the region. And it's okay to do these at major intersections because there's walkable, and it allows the infrastructure like the trail network that you've already worked on to build out to have a higher return on investment because of the number of people using them. So the region has been heavily studying and planning for a better functioning bus system. This density is key for having a viable bus system as well. And walking and biking to and from bus stops are one of the most important things that you can tackle when it comes to making this viable. If you can't leave the front door of your house or the front door of where you work, then and get safely to the bus stop, it's hard for it ever to be viable. And so what we can do by building these nodes across cities reduces the distance that people have to travel to get to these areas. And it avoids roads becoming like 71 Business filled with strip malls, that the only way you can get there is to drive across town, and everybody in town is driving to the same place to access the same services. And so I know oftentimes people worry about this mixing of uses, but I think if you look at areas like downtown Rogers and the new mixed use developments going on over at Pinnacle, they can be designed in a way that fit the context of the neighborhoods and make everyone's quality of life better by decreasing that travel. I'll go to another area in Rogers over by the Scottsdale development. Lots of undeveloped space, many of which is hard surface. Even people in these adjoining neighborhoods can't walk and bike safely to these restaurants and shops because there's a lack of trails and sidewalks to connect directly to the front door. And if there is a connection that you're able to make, there's no way to navigate this area safely through the sea of parking lots and high traffic coming in and out, or crossing Highway 71B or Olive Street. So thinking about infilling this area, reducing some of the asphalt area and with higher density and mixing of uses, adding in multifamily housing, creates the ability for people that are working in minimum wage jobs, often in services like this sector, to live closer to where they work. And that allows them to have a shorter distance to work, and it increases the likelihood that they're going to show up to work on time and be consistently. But many times I hear people worry about who is going to live in these apartments or these high density developments. They are the same people that you all see every day when you go to your coffee shop, the grocery store, your gas station. And so they accept that they are living closer to where they work. So I mentioned safety. When I talk about calming traffic and safe neighborhood streets, I think it's important that we think about how this can have a real impact. And this isn't just about bikes, this is about people walking. but up to 77% of cars speed on non-freeway streets, according to federal research. So focusing on calming traffic, slowing it down on our streets, especially getting at or below that 20-mile-per-hour zone, has an incredible significant. You're almost saving twice the number of people in a crash just by lowering it from 30 to 20 miles per hour. So finally, I'll leave you with this, that, we can't build a trail everywhere, but we need to build them where we can. And then when we've solved that one issue, we need to work on the first and last mile problem of getting from the front door of your neighborhood, your house, your school, your work, to get to these trails and bus stops. And some of the infrastructure pieces that are proven to be successful around the world include protected bike lanes and neighborhood greenways that calm the streets and allow people to share the roads. And I think if you see this, it helps also reduce the pedestrian, bicycle, and car frustrations when you have major roadways with bikes traveling on them in the same lane as the cars. So, all right, thank you. I appreciate the time letting me talk today.
Thanks, Paxton. We'll, if you can stand by, we'll go to Tim Simon and let him do his presentation. If you want to stop sharing your screen, and Tim, if you're there, say hello, and you can start sharing your screen.
I am here, but I do not have a presentation. I was more here for the, like you said, informal conversation.
Okay. If you could just speak a little bit then about the regional transit plan and where you guys are with that. I think most of us have seen it. I don't know that everybody's had a chance to hear about it and think about it. So if you could just maybe start with that.
Yeah, and actually I might share my screen just because I had a few things I was pulling up as Paxton was talking. And I think I'll start by segueing off of what he was saying. And can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you. And can you see my screen okay?
Also, yes.
So I don't know if a lot of people don't think about this, but every transit trip starts with someone biking, rolling, scooting, or walking. So everything that Paxton says really complements transit as well. And so these two issues aren't in isolation. I can give you you can implement Connect Northwest Arkansas and put a bunch of buses out there and run them every 15 minutes, but it's all going to be for nothing if it doesn't happen in combination with everything that he's saying about bike and pedestrian trails, sidewalk network up to date. Also with land use, what we're all really talking about, what this session is about, that land use. You're the chicken or the egg. Should we do transit supportive land use and then do transit, or should we put out great transit and that'll spur transit supportive land use? I disagree. I think they always have to happen more or less in tandem, and make sure that they're matching each other. I think a common aspect you see with Connect Northwest Arkansas is we didn't always focus on. You'll hear a lot of people talk about captive versus choice riders, or should we do coverage type systems or efficient systems? I don't like to think of it in that way. I think that we fall into dangerous buckets when we do that. I think it's all about matching your service delivery tools, and you should have a toolbox no matter what community you're in. And Rogers is already has a toolbox. You have your new kind of demand type service. You have traditional fixed route, etc. ADA demand response vehicles, what have you. And you should match those with the underlying transit market you're serving. Our goal isn't to make everyone ride a bus. It's to provide a multimodal network. Some people want to walk, some people want to take a bike, some people want to drive a car, and that's fine. And but we want to make even the playing field, so to speak. And that's also a lot of what Paxton's trying to get at is it's always pretty much unevenly divided and focused on the car. And often the pedestrian or the transit rider or the person on a bike. Paxton, I just looked at your website. I like changing that person on a bike instead of cyclist. Seems to usually get the short end of this. So that being said, I can kind of give a recap too of where we're at. So Connect Northwest Arkansas was really about developing a regional plan, knowing that the city of Rogers does not have the same experience as Bentonville or Fayetteville. And so it really delved into each community, and we really started to understand the travel patterns of each community so that we could shape recommendations that could be adaptable and grow with each community. We're already seeing City of Rogers doing the right thing with some of their areas and thinking about growth and transit supportive growth. So that's a good thing because we need to keep on that. I think a lot of people always think like, well, you know, we don't want skyscrapers, and transit supportive growth doesn't mean skyscrapers. It just means being smart and efficient with your use of land. That area that Paxton was talking about, that struck a chord with me because we were thinking about how to serve this with a transit bus. And if you start doing some of the things he's talking about and getting rid of these massive parking lots, or start incentivizing or developing code that brings the storefront to the street, and developing sidewalks as well, then you start to get at that more transit supportive land use. Now you can't get rid of parking lots completely, but maybe put them in the back and let, you know, walkways to the side and everything. But you all have a lot of opportunity. John, you had mentioned where you're at on that kind of evolution. I'd say you all are in your infancy, but that's a good thing. That's not saying that you're behind the times. It's saying you're a growing community and you have tons of opportunity. I live in Austin, Texas, and I work on this project called Project Connect, which is a massive $7.5 billion project we just passed last year. 2 light rail lines, several bus rapid transit lines, and a whole other slew. We're tunneling under our downtown and tunneling under our river, and that sounds cool and everything. I'm excited to be working on a project that involves tunneling, but it's very expensive. And what it is, it's because we're all happy that Project Connect passed, but it's failed probably 4 times over the last 20 or 30 years, trying to pass some kind of real transit initiative. And now Austin's at the point of, we've grown so rapidly and we're still growing, that we're having to do this, and it's a lot more expensive. Whereas City of Rogers, you all are having a speaker series right now and thinking about your growth, and that's great. So to answer your question, Ron, I think you're in your infancy, and I think you all are poised to make some great decisions and really future-proof your city. And then some other things that kind of got me thinking with what Paxton was talking. People, you know, get maybe scared or shy about transit supportive transit supportive or transportation supportive land use and what it can look like. There's a few areas, and I can pass these to you, John. These are pretty aspirational, but it's not that crazy. This is a city in the Netherlands. So if you zoom in, you can see what a community who wanted to value pedestrian and bicyclists did. Now, if I zoom in really close, they still have cars, but they've put the bicycle path, these pathways in the front, and really focused on them. And then they feed into, you know, bigger streets. Then there's, you know, transit facilities at the end. But just, it shows a community that valued what Paxton and I are talking about, and how beautiful and well equipped you can be, and how well it can function. Now there's other cases, you know, all over that aren't as extreme. I just like to always share this one. I've never been here, but I really want to go look at it. I know some of you got to go on a tour in the Netherlands, but this is more out in the suburbs, not in a big city. So it's just showing opportunities of what you can do. So, John, that's all I have. Like I said, here to more for the conversation and talk on anything else you will want to talk about or answer questions about Connect Northwest Arkansas, or anything else you want to chat about.
Thanks, Tim. If you can also stop, there you go. Thank you very much. And we're going to have Elizabeth Bowen. Elizabeth Bowen is with Northwest Arkansas Regional Planning Commission and focuses primarily, well, on a lot of things, but one of her areas of focus is on the regional open space plan. We had to cancel the water session, and so she's also been involved with the Illinois River Water Project, and so I've asked her to speak a little bit about some information that came out in a recent workshop at IRWP. And so she's got some slides also around water. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay? All right, great. So, I'll just stand here. Thank you. So, I'm a regional planner, but I'm also a project manager, so I take on very specific projects. Many of those have been, like what John is talking about the Illinois River Watershed, very recent project that we've been asked to take a step in the direction of, being able to look at some infrastructure and assessment for the stormwater for the Illinois River Watershed. But just kind of give you an idea of what our organization is and does. So we are a council of governments. Mayor Hines is one of our members. All the 31 mayors of the Benton and Washington counties are members. 2 mayors in McDonald County, the county judges in Benton and Washington County, and also the commissioners in Benton and Washington County, and the commissioners in McDonald County. Those are our members, voting members that determine what we do as a region. It also includes the Beaver Water District. The airport authority is also members, and the transit agencies determine what we do as a region, where we spend our money, where we spend our membership dollars, and where we spend state dollars and federal dollars that we get. So we're not just a planning organization, we are also your metropolitan planning organization. So we serve 2 hats for the region. So as a metropolitan planning organization, that's determined by the census, so any area that's over 200,000, we get federal dollars. So we get about $12 million that we distribute out to particular areas based on grant opportunities. Rogers has, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 grants with us right now for different transportation needs. So we work on transit. We have about $2.5 million in transit. We just completed the transit development study that Tim just talked about. There's 2 transit agencies in the region, the Ozark Regional Transit that supports your area. I also work on the active transportation, so the bicycle and pedestrian plans. We have a plan that's a regional plan that is 32 city plans, and then a regional plan. We have catalyst projects, some in Rogers, Bentonville, Springdale, that all work together to create that regional network. So the neighborhoods can go from the sidewalks that your local planning organization determines where they are, to a local trail, to a regional trail, and hopefully that includes transit and other transportation opportunities. So those are some of the things that I work on, and the other thing that John wanted me to talk about is the environmental piece. So I'd like for you to look at our 2045 plan. So we create a plan that looks at the next 25 years. We look at the population growth, where's employment going to be, where are the schools going to be, where are people going to live, where's housing going to go. So on our website, that 2045 plan is available. It includes transit and the environmental piece. So part of that environmental piece, so that chapter 6 that I'm going to talk about, includes the watersheds, includes an open space plan, and has quite a lot of information just about the environment in general, how we should be building, how should smart growth occur in our cities and regionally, how the infill should take place. A lot of it is going to be your local planning organizations, your local planner and your commissions, and then of course the city council piece. So as far as the Illinois River Watershed, we had a few years ago a lawsuit against Arkansas because our region was putting too much phosphorus into Oklahoma. That included this city as part of that. So lots of money has been poured into how do we fix that problem. June 30th, the Illinois River Watershed invited a lot of us, Mayor Hines, John and I, and many others to look at an action plan for stormwater in the Illinois River Watershed. So, and some of the reasons why, and I just have a couple of slides that I wanted to share. So here's a visual of the Illinois River Watershed. I mean, I think where it's a presentation so you can see a little bit better. But notice up in the headwaters, the very beginning portion of that watershed, that's where you have Bentonville, Rogers, Springdale, and Fayetteville. So all along that very beginning where the water falls and starts flowing downstream through some of the more rural areas, we, as a city, are having lots of impervious surface being built that's creating, when water falls on that area, it concentrates it and shoots it through the system, taking lots of things with it. And a lot of that is our stream banks. The storm that we had on April 28th, that a lot of you saw, 3 feet of water in areas that we've never seen water pile up before. A lot of it was because we had a much higher significant rain event than we've had before, but it's because of our impervious surfaces concentrating water and some of our systems not performing as maybe they should, or maybe we haven't built enough systems to take care of that water. So the Illinois River Watershed, just wanted to share with the group, we have a problem. We all are aware that we have a problem, especially based on that one event that we saw. So they shared with us the average erosion rate in this watershed was 5.2 feet of loss of stream bank a year. So the Illinois River and some of their subsidiary creek banks are losing significant amounts of stream. So one of the streams has received 42 feet. So when you think about a farm, as that creek's coming through their farm, in 1 year they lost 42 feet of their land. Look at the sediment and the phosphorus that left that property, ended up in the river, and ended up in Oklahoma and into the Lake Tenkeller. So those are the things that Illinois wanted to bring to our attention, reaffirm that yes, we still have a problem and we need to work on it more now. That the population projection for our area right now, we're about 550,000 in 2025. If you look at our plan, 975,000 people. Where are those people going to go? So you've heard about, let's do infill, let's make it where they can ride transit and walk and bike to work, those types of things. But we need impervious surface. We need infrastructure that's going to capture that water and protect it. We need to allow the streams, don't overbuild around the streams, allow them to have the access to accept the water and work like they're supposed to. But we need to build infrastructure. We need to look at open space throughout the entire watershed area. And Rogers being, at the beginning of that headwater area, you have I'd say a very big responsibility for this whole system to be looking at how you are building and how you are growing in your communities.
Can you speak briefly about what is phosphorus? How does it get there? Why is it if it goes in the water?
I am not an expert on that, John. So
I can say a couple of things, then Lance and Joe, or I think Mayor Hines knows as much as anybody about this. But phosphorus is a nutrient, and it is critical in agriculture. In fact, to geek out a little bit on history, you can trace the history of ancient civilizations based on their access to phosphorus, because you can't do agriculture without phosphorus. And so a lot of the spread of civilization was people going out and finding sources of phosphorus that they could then bring back to maintain their agriculture once we figured out that this is how plants work. It was a long time ago. And so phosphorus is loaded on the fields. The poultry industry ends up, you put a lot of phosphorus into poultry, and most of it comes out the back of the chicken, and then you have to deal with all that phosphorus. It's a nutrient. And it's critical for life. And when you dump phosphorus into streams, it feeds algae. more effectively than anything else. So you have these huge algae blooms that basically destroy the stream because that algae consumes oxygen in the water. It deoxygenizes the water, and that affects the crustaceans and the fish and everything else. And so by throwing the balance of nutrients out of whack, by dumping phosphorus into the streams to destroy the lakes, and that's where the lawsuit came, that everything's dumping into Grand Lake and Lake Tenkiller, I think, and killing the fish and the wildlife and destroying these lakes in Oklahoma, which they relied on because they've got, get a lot of benefit, tourists and everything else using those lakes. And besides that, it's not good and it's nasty. So, is that all pretty much?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It's come to this.
One of the things is it's fertilizers that, like you said, get put on the fields a lot. And so it's in the soil. It's soaked in over here. And that's why when the soil goes to get your phosphorus from it. In agriculture, in some ways, it's easier to deal with because there's large plots of land that you can have a farmer and relays done a deal where they license how much they can apply and things like that.
Elizabeth, are you on mute? I'm not hearing anything.
Sorry. So when they license them, they can control the application of fertilizers and phosphorus. But what doesn't happen is the homeowners, and as mentioned, we're in the upper reaches of that watershed, so the homeowners are now applying fertilizers to their yards. We're over applying it because we don't really pay attention to what the application fee is. It's just easier to throw it out, it gets on the sidewalks, and immediately washes it off. So there's some real concerns with that and how do you address that. And that mostly happens through education. It's just no real license that they're working very well. Yes.
So the relationship between this and density and what Elizabeth is talking about with removing permeable soil, permeable surface. A lot of what went into the comprehensive growth map with the creation of the regional centers and neighborhood centers was to create very small fenced off areas, basically growth boundaries for density, to say we need density to handle population, but we need to focus it in high density areas. And then to maintain the permeable surface that we have in our legacy neighborhoods. So these are two sides of the same coin. It's not that the planning staff, or when we went through this with the Plans and Policies Committee and then eventually, with City Council, it's not that we were saying we want unlimited density everywhere, we want apartment buildings all over the city of Rogers. It was the exact opposite of that. Prior to the current version of the comprehensive growth map, there was no limit on where density could be. And so over time, density is going wherever people just choose to put it. And it was a kind of a one-off decision made by planning commissioners in accordance with the comprehensive growth map, but the comprehensive growth map itself was really just a projection of growth patterns. It wasn't about where does it make the most sense to absorb density. What Elizabeth is saying with the infrastructure required to support that is that where you do have pockets of density, you have hardscape engineered infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure to handle it. So this goes down all kinds of different rabbit holes. I'm trying to keep it as top line as possible, but when you have yards and stormwater and everything dumping right into concrete, stormwater infrastructure, until it gets out of the concrete, you're retaining all the nutrients, all the pollutants, all the trash and garbage and everything else. And as that shoots out into the stream banks, then you're just flushing all that downstream to Oklahoma, which is, at least it's not Arkansas, but you're pushing all that, you're pushing it all somewhere else. And so by having pockets of density, we can have regional detention that treats the water and to at least try to get some of that water evaporated, some of the nutrients handled before it goes into the streams. We can't just keep putting concrete in every ditch and every stream to deal with the water, because that's just pushing all these problems. And since we're at the very top of the watershed, it really is, this is the most critical part of the entire system, is in Northwest Arkansas. All right?
So an example of what John is talking about, I have up on the screen. So If you have areas that don't have a lot of infrastructure built, you have the ability to not have as much runoff. So in the top left, you have 10% runoff when you have a field with some trees, for example. To the top right, a low-density residential area, you'd have 20% runoff. Bottom left, a medium density, you'd have 30% runoff. But a high density, you'd have 55% runoff. But if you have areas directly outside of those high density areas that are ready for that runoff, ready to capture that water and utilize it, not let it just go outside, follow those concrete and follow it to the stream and take the stream banks and run off. We need to have retention ponds, we need to have riparian buffers, we need to have things that are collecting and not allowing that significant damage that occurs from significant runoff.
Again.
Yeah, go right ahead.
So this slide seems to be saying you should never have density, right? I mean, the slide is saying the more density you have, the worse it is. So you should never have density. But here's the point that we're trying to make is that you have to have density. You can either put medium density everywhere and you end up with Southern California, or you can have pockets of density. So a big objective with the comprehensive growth map is to really limit density almost everywhere. But where you don't limit density, you want as much density as you can possibly take. If you're going to do it, do it. And so, you know, RMF, whatever, RMF 50, most cities that are really grappling with developing a comprehensive growth strategy have minimum densities where they have density at all. It's like if you're going to develop at this intersection, which was one of our neighborhood centers or a regional center type space, it's not, we want you to keep it down below 12. It's got to be 30 or more or you can't build on it because it's so precious. If you're going to say we've got to have some density here and there in just these pockets, we've got to have as much as we can handle where we put it. Because you're going to have to deal with the water. And you're going to have to deal with the cost of maintaining streets and the cost of putting in the pipelines and the electric lines and utilities and everything else. You've got to deal with it. And if you deal with it in little pockets and have nodes of density, then go for it. If you're not going to do it, then just say we're going to maintain all of our pervious space and we're not going to grow. But those are kind of the two responsible choices.
So John, how much time do we have?
10 minutes.
Because it's 5 minutes till 12. So, all right. So let's just jump to the end and show what the Illinois River Watershed Partnership asked the group. I say us. I don't mean me. I mean the entire group of people, about 40 people that were there. This is what they wanted to see happen. So they wanted to transform a group of people that meets at my office that looks at the MS4, their compliance group on how to manage their MS4 permits. So staff from your city comes, Fayetteville. So we have 21 MS4 permits in the Benton and Washington County area. So they all meet. They would like to see that compliance group become a regional stormwater management advisory council. Probably not going to happen. We could create a regional stormwater management advisory council if the commission wanted that. You know, if your mayor and all the other mayors wanted to create that group. The MS4 group is for a very specific item. They have different people. You know, they have the permit managers versus, you know, floodplain managers are on that group. So two different people in lots of cases would serve on those groups. So they also wanted to, you know, review all of the regulations and policies and implement new policies. So they wanted to have areas be reforested, city-owned riparian areas, that would also educate the entire region in the Illinois River watershed. So by 2024, they wanted to fix the infrastructure that was determined to be faulty or needed based on the assessment in the 2022. So that was an item in 2022 that I skipped, was the assessment. So that's a big piece, is having an assessment of the infrastructure that you already know. The Rogers knows where their stormwater infrastructure is. Is it working right? Do we need to add infrastructure? How can we improve that? So by 2026, they wanted to implement agreed upon region-wide comprehensive stormwater management and impact development and have low-impact development practices put into the regulations. So, and the final item is adopt the Northwest Arkansas Open Space Plan into your urban planning documents. And conserve high priority properties. So in that open space plan, we have a GIS model that was run that determines where the high priority areas, the properties that would be most beneficial to either purchase and keep as a natural area, add a riparian area, become a park. We have in that document, it describes all of those things, and stormwater is a very big piece of that particular document. Do you want to add anything else about this particular? Okay, so me being a regional planner, they're asking regional planning to manage this for them, create, get the funding, do this assessment, and help the region get this infrastructure. Why would we just do Illinois? The city of Rogers, half Illinois, half Beaver watershed. So that is one of the things that we talked about yesterday at the commission is, if we're going to do this, let's do it for all of the cities and do the entire area. So we're working with the Corps of Engineers, working with the cities, and we will be communicating more about that as we go along. And there's quite a bit of funding that we've been able to already identify that could hopefully help this happen. So one of the very last thing that talks about the Northwest Arkansas Open Space Plan, we as an organization, we have a group called the Northwest Arkansas Open Space Coalition that has prepared an ordinance and was already preparing to come to the city councils of all of the cities and ask them to implement that plan and have it where that plan is looked at every time a development occurs. So the city looks at it for that development and the developer has to look at that plan. Is there something that's in the plan that could help that development be more efficient and effective for all the purposes that that plan is developed?
Yeah, I think the whole
Stormwater thing is just a can that keeps getting kicked down the road a little bit. We're in pretty good shape. I mean, we've got a really good set of ordinances. Our best management practices are solid. Within the Illinois watershed, our development standards are very good. Since we implemented those about, 6, 7 years ago, 8 years maybe, there have been some developments nationally that we're looking at trying to find best practices and implement those. And then, as Elizabeth mentioned, why not also apply the same standards to the Beaver watershed? I mean, it's all the same karst geography and geology, and the same factors apply. We're protecting the water that goes to Oklahoma, but we're not doing necessarily as much to protect the water that goes into our drinking supply. So, does that really make sense? I also think, and I believe the mayor shares this view, that this will eventually be taken on as a federal mandate. That if cities are, eventually this problem is a significant enough problem nationally that we're going to be told what to do, and the cost of fixing this is going to just continue to exponentially climb the further we go down the road. So the time to do this was 50 years ago. The second best time is today, kind of thing. We need to continue to take on water quality and preserving as much open space as we can. And we're constantly thinking about that competing value as we're looking to absorb growth. So how do you grow at the same time you're saying you can't develop land, or you have to do it at a very low density level and all that. So the value of things like riparian buffers and whatnot, Turtle Creek eventually works its way up into downtown Rogers, and there's basically a very urbanized version of Turtle Creek that goes sort of north and east of Walnut Street, where it's highly channelized. It's got a lot of concrete, it's been channelized into concrete basins and put into culverts and stuff like that. Eventually, right here in downtown Rogers, it's buried in concrete. And if you look after a big storm and start walking down the creek bed from Walnut towards, towards Osage Creek, it's full of garbage. It's just a mess. I mean, there's trash bags, and I don't know how many people throw vodka bottles out of their car, but every time there's a flood, you find thousands of empty vodka bottles all over the place. And it's because there is no riparian buffer, beyond Walnut. It's been channelized, and there's development goes right up to the edge of these stormwater areas. And so there's nothing we can do about that, I don't think, without buying, a couple hundred houses and building a stream, through old downtown Rogers. But for the rest of these areas where we're already seeing a lot of encroachment in uptown Rogers, and I know that Councilwoman Legier is dealing with this on a daily basis, of people that are angry about flooding in their backyard because they built a house in the flood zone, that there are things that we can do potentially to at least alleviate future problems. So it's this is not easy, and it competes with land rights and all kinds of things. It's a highly charged political thing, and it's very complicated. But our strategy has been to encourage density in certain areas. And the reason we're doing that is so that we free up the opportunity for growth where we can handle it, where we can manage water quality and dealing with storms. So, and transit and bicycle pedestrian infrastructure. A lot of things get right if you're thinking about managing density in a very active way. Boy, this has been so one way. Any questions about any of that?
On this topic, basically the two differences are this lawsuit that's gone on for over 30 years, was about point source contamination, i.e. our sewer plants and larger poultry production and those types of things. That's what the lawsuit focused on. Now, there's a whole lot of data that's been collected. Also been a whole lot of work done in that regard to correct the problem. We finally have a settlement on that issue. The challenge is now going to be that because there's millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of data that's been collected over this entire time period, there's a great argument for someone, i.e. EPA, to start making us regulate stormwater, of which we have not really been under an order to do. It's been do the best you can do. Once you get into a situation, and there's many examples across the country that are in this position, once you become under a mandate to regulate stormwater, one, you can't afford it. I was told by the leading expert in the nation on this subject that I could have $10 billion in cash at First National Bank, and it wouldn't make a bit of difference towards fixing this issue. But what you end up in is a situation where the city is then in charge of regulating the stormwater runoff. And so we would be in a position like they are in many places across the country to deal with air pollution. We're in the business of now selling credits and trading credits for or point source stormwater, not point source phosphorus. And those are the challenges that I'm not going to face. I may or may not even be growing oxygen at the point that this becomes a real challenge for the continued growth of Northwest Arkansas. But it will happen. And so for that very reason, I just feel like, having watched the last 30 years of this phosphorus discussion at point sources, that we have a real responsibility to make sure that we minimize and limit the challenges that the people that are going to be making big decisions down the road are faced with making. And I think that we'll be judged on it, moreover, than just even a responsibility. So that's where the open space comes into play. That's, it's not just about keeping green space for the sake of keeping green space. All of it plays together in a way that puts us in a position to have a straight-faced argument that we're doing the best we can do with the cards we were dealt. And that will be how the structure is set up for the regulation in the future. I mean, this is really no different than, you've got an expert from DC that flies down and takes a snapshot of your community and goes back and plugs it into a manual to determine what your fate is. Well, you probably want to have your best argument available, and a lot of that ought to be some compassion around we didn't just go blow it up because a bunch of developers from around the country saw that we were growing faster than anywhere in the nation, and we just let everybody do whatever the hell they wanted to do. So I think that there's two sides to it. We've solved kind of one of them for the most part. We're in a holding pattern. I mean, we've got to keep doing better, and it's going to cost a lot of money with our sewer plants and our retrofits. But this is a much, much bigger issue that none of us really understand all the complexities in. So I hope that's
Can I ask a question?
clear as mud.
So is there a formula or something that we can use that would say if we project our population to be X and we have this many square miles of land, this is the amount that should be reserved for open green space?
There's sort of, yes, and the way you get to that, we've completed about half the surveying required to be able to arrive at that formula. Basically, there are watershed modeling programs that the Corps of Engineers develops and makes available for cities that allow you to model impact of development on the watershed and on water quality and permeable surface, and takes all that into account to figure out how much you're percolating, how much is evaporating, and then how much goes into the streams, and then subsequently the impact that additional water and velocity has on stream bank preservation and everything else. So, but those are very, very complex, difficult to maintain technical models, and require a ton of data to be able to populate the model itself to be able to run it. So we've surveyed about half or so of the survey points necessary to populate a model. We've got a proposal from a consultant right now. We're actually actively doing surveying, but a proposal from a consultant to build the model and maintain it. What this will allow us to do then is to, let's say we have a developer come in and say, I want to do this. We can model that proposal and determine the impact that has on that micro watershed, that feeds into the broader watershed and the surrounding stormwater infrastructure. This will allow us in the future to be able to do similar things to what we do with road infrastructure, where we can look at the modeled impact that something would have on roads, on traffic, and based on that data say, yes, you can do the development, but you're going to have to improve the intersection because your off-site intersection that you will be impacting is inadequate to handle the demand that you're putting on it. So with that kind of a model, we'd be able to say, yes, you can do that, but it's going to require you to build a new storm culvert across this field to get over to the system, which is over there. Right now we can't do it. This is like, if you've done multivariable math, this is like thousands of variable math. And these models can take, a long time with a lot of computer power to run, but you can get there. Complicated.
So as far as, some of the projections for, how many people we're going to have, where there's 975,000 people are going to be in the Benton, Washington area. If you look at that 2045 plan, those projections, we had a staff member in our office that she works in the GIS field. So she took what the city planners, the staff, the road departments, where they projected things would happen, where they knew businesses were going to happen, where they knew development was going to happen, and they projected that out based on census. So we have that information. We also have the Beaver Watershed District has created a report. We have the Corps of Engineers that has created reports. We have the Illinois that has reports. We have the FEMA that has done stuff for our particular area. So there's lots of information. We need to continue pulling it together, continue working with each other, working with our downstream organizations, and come up with the best thing that we can do. But we can't determine exactly where the next person's going to build. We can't determine that infill is going to happen, that John's talking about should happen. It's what are people going to do? It's hard to predict. And how much more water are we going to get? When you look, I've got a couple of slides that show the increased amount of precipitation that we're getting, but it's not only increasing per event, but the events are increasing, the number of events. the 100-year rains that we had 4 in 2 years. And normally those are 1 in 10 years or longer. So we have lots of unpredictability that we don't know how to take care of either.
We've had large parts of Rogers that have been hit by a 500-year and a 1,000-year event, just in the last few years. So much bigger events, much more frequent. And so the way we regulate this is we use FEMA-produced tables that predict, that tell you got to have so many inches of rain in a certain amount of time for it to be a 1,000-year event. And then we have design standards that design infrastructure at either a 10 or a 100-year event. And then, the flood insurance maps and all this kind of stuff is all based on that 100-year floodplain. Well, if that's happening every year now, then the data that we're using to regulate this is no longer valid. By the way, I will throw out a pitch. I think that we clearly have the most knowledgeable stormwater regulation guy with Chris Paxton working for the city right now. In Northwest Arkansas, he is truly a really good professional guy who knows his stuff, and we are enforcing regulations now that I don't even know if we knew about in the past, but he's combing the regulations to find out how can we really do the most with what we have in terms of regulation. And these are not horrible anti-business regulations. They're just, if you're going to do it, you can do it, but you're going to have to do it this way, kinds of things. They typically don't result in significant costs to developers or anything like that. And also, I think Lance Job is a fantastic city engineer that's very knowledgeable. He's got a very broad understanding of civil engineering that goes beyond just how am I going to build this standard cross-section road into why would I build that road here and how does that impact the stormwater system and everything else. Kind of like the way that Frankie kind of knows where everything is. Lance knows where everything is. And so we're poised well to study the stormwater system and to make recommendations and to deal with it. But I don't need a model to tell me that the more permeable ground you remove, the worse the flooding gets. Regardless of what you do to retain or detain water, you're still changing the system, and it always has unforeseen consequences when you do that. So the more that we can maintain the lowest possible density in most of the town, and to offset that with the highest possible density where we say we're going to deal with infrastructure to handle it, then the better off we'll be. All right, anything else? Thank you for your patience.